Squid Game. The series exploded worldwide in 2021, and with the release of its second season last December, it once again captivated audiences. By now, everyone is familiar with the main premise of the show, but let's briefly go over it. The series follows people drowning in debt and living in extremely poor conditions, who are enticed by wealthy, upper-class strangers with the promise of winning enough money through a game to completely transform their lives. However, what begins as a hopeful competition quickly spirals into something no one could have ever anticipated. In these games, reminiscent of childhood contests, the losers are brutally executed, and for every elimination, 100 million won is added to the prize pot. There are exactly 456 players in the game, which means that only one person will win, while the other 455 will meet their untimely end. But did you know that a similar event, without any cash prize involved, actually took place in real life? In fact, it is speculated that the Squid Game series was inspired by that very incident. Let me tell you the story. The decision is yours. The Korean War between 1950 and 1953 deepened the division between North and South Korea. In the aftermath of the war, South Korea faced an economic collapse, leaving millions homeless, unemployed, and in desperate need of help. The country was in chaos. Crime rates soared, and orphaned children and the destitute began living on the streets. This dire situation began to change under the authoritarian regime of President Park Chung-hee, who seized power in a military coup in 1961. As the country pursued rapid industrialization and economic growth, its cities modernized, and South Korea started to open up to the world. However, behind this growth lay a strict policy of discipline. The government introduced harsh laws to maintain social order and systematically began rounding up people it was deemed troublesome. One of the most horrifying outcomes of this oppressive regime was the establishment of the Brothers' Home in Busan in 1975. Officially presented as a rehabilitation center, the facility was supported by the government with the aim of cleaning up the streets by removing the homeless and those considered detrimental to society. In reality, however, things were very different. The individuals sent to Brothers' Home were not only the homeless, orphans, people with physical and mental disabilities, innocent young individuals, and even anyone simply loitering on the streets were forcibly taken there by police in white minibuses. Many families remained unaware that their missing loved ones had been taken to this camp. The people brought in were referred to as delinquents. The facility was under strict surveillance. Everyone wore the same identical tracksuit, slept in bunk beds, and lived under harsh conditions. Inside, people were subjected to both physical and psychological abuse. Meals were inadequate, personal hygiene was neglected, and the living environment was far worse than normal conditions. They were forced to perform hard labor, using their physical strength for exhausting tasks. The detainees were made to work in industrial jobs and handcrafted productions. The state made significant profits from their labor, yet the workers received no payment at all. Brothers' Home was not just a forced labor camp. It was a horrifying torture center. Even minor mistakes were met with brutal punishments. Guards regularly beat detainees, subjected them to electric shocks, and in some cases, tortured them to death. Those who attempted to escape were either executed upon capture or subjected to severe torture. Women and children were not spared from the horrors of this place. Even young children were beaten and forced into labor. For women, the situation was even more harrowing. Some were victims of sexual abuse, while others allegedly disappeared without a trace, never even making it into official records. We can understand the victims' suffering through the drawings they left behind. One depicts the violence they endured. Another illustrates the sexual abuse that took place. A guard holding a blood-stained club. A person, stripped naked, being doused with cold water. Brothers' Home was essentially a detention camp, but activities were still organized for the people held there. However, these activities were not meant to boost morale. Instead, they were used to exert even more control and pressure over the detainees. Prisoners were often forced into physical tests and competitions. These were not for sport or entertainment, but rather an extension of the punishment system. The stronger ones were made to work even harder, while those who failed were beaten or left to starve. In one of these so-called games, individuals were forced to stand on their heads until 1 a.m. Those who couldn't endure and collapsed were either beaten or deprived of food, while those who managed to hold out were rewarded. Sometimes the guards forced the prisoners to fight against each other. These forced activities were part of the regime of fear at Brothers' Home, designed to psychologically break the prisoners and further crush the weak. In 1981, a promotional film about Brothers' Home portrayed the facility as a safe haven for the homeless, disabled, and socially disadvantaged. The film showcased scenes of well-prepared meals and quality education, creating the illusion of a well-run institution. The true purpose of the film was to ease the conscience of viewers by concealing the dark reality of Brothers' Home and presenting a falsely positive image. Many people were forced to stay there for extended periods. Over time, their mental health deteriorated, and many even lost their lives. Official records estimate that around 600 people died during this period. The suffering continued for several more years, until 1987. Up until that year, Brothers' Home operated with the full support of the South Korean government. In 1987, investigations by a journalist, along with testimonies from a few individuals who had managed to escape, exposed the horrors taking place inside Brothers' Home. As the scandal grew, public pressure intensified, ultimately leading to the facility's closure. However, most of the crimes committed there went unpunished. The South Korean government never issued an apology for what had happened. Since most of the events took place during a dark period in the media, not enough evidence was collected. Now, let's examine the claims suggesting that Squid Game may have been inspired by Brothers' Home. In Squid Game, participants are chosen from among those drowning in debt, deemed worthless by society, and transported in white vans. Similarly, in Brothers' Home, individuals in desperate situations were rounded up and taken away in white vehicles. In Squid Game, players wear identical striped uniforms, just as detainees in Brothers' Home were forced to wear uniformed striped clothing. Both Squid Game and Brothers' Home housed people in bunk beds, reinforcing the institutionalized nature of their confinement. Both featured competitive games where mistakes resulted in severe punishments, death in Squid Game, and brutal consequences in Brothers' Home. In Squid Game, no one was held accountable for the deaths of the players. Likewise, in Brothers' Home, the deaths of countless detainees remained unpunished. While Squid Game serves as a critique of ruthless capitalist competition, Brothers' Home stands as a grim example of state oppression and human rights violations. These parallels highlight the systemic abuse and inhumane treatment within both structures. So, what do you think? Is Squid Game a reflection of this dark history, or just a coincidental metaphor? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm your captain, Cyrox, and we've reached the end of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Remember, no matter how painful the truth may be, understanding it is the first step toward a brighter future.